I want to thank you all, especially those who have attended most, if not all, of our Engaging China series this spring. And before I introduce our final lecture of the spring seminar, I do want to again extend our appreciation to the U of O President's Office, who provided much of the funding to get this off the ground, and then Center of Asia and Pacific Studies and the Lundquist College of Business, who successfully won the grant that we announced a couple of weeks ago that will allow this to continue through the summer with a summer reading program for many of our graduate students in business, and then many of those folks will be taking a study tour to Beijing and Shanghai in September. So we look forward to seeing the program continue not only this year but in the years to come. Our final speaker in the Engaging China series this spring is Hua-yu Lee. She is an associate professor of political science at Oregon State University, and despite her orange and black school colors, we welcome her with open arms. She teaches courses on U.S.-China relations, comparative politics, and East Asian security. She received her Ph.D. in political science from Columbia University and an M.A. in East Asian studies from Harvard. Her current research interests include China's political economy, Sino-Soviet relations, and elite politics in China. Again, my pleasure to introduce Hua-yu Lee.
Thank you. Yesterday, when I told our office coordinator that I'm coming to give a talk at Eugene, and she said, "Tell the docs we're pretty good too." So on that note, the subject today is addressing China a threat to the U.S. or not. Before I get into this subject, let me just say a few things. I grew up in China, and I was educated in both Japan and the United States. So I'm here today, and I just concluded a 2-week trip to China. I'm here not as a China apologist, and also I'm not trying to express moral judgments when we deal with this very complicated U.S.-China relations. But in order to understand these complicated relations, and I'm trying to deal with several topics. U.S. objectives in Asia, the rise of China, U.S. contribution to China's rise, and U.S.-China interdependency. And also, I'll begin to talk about this contentment versus engagement argument. And then, of course, this whole issue of China as a threat to U.S. And then China as a developing country. And toward the very end, we'll come back to this question. Is China a threat to the United States? So let's first deal with U.S. objectives in the world, and then we'll move on to talk about U.S. objectives in China. I'm sure you are familiar with those ideas. The United States does not want to have nuclear and these weapons of mass destruction proliferated. That's a very important part of U.S. objective in the world. And secondly, U.S. always want to have democracy, human rights, always pushing for this, the spread of democracy in the world. And thirdly, free trade. It's a very important idea and practice for U.S. to have free trade. But of course, such objectives sometimes conflict with each other. Just give you an example. United States often talks about this nuclear non-proliferation, but then recently, remember when President Bush visited India and basically gave blessing to this new nuclear power in Asia. U.S. objectives in Asia. And this has been the long-standing objectives that the United States had ever since the end of World War II The United States wants to have regional stability, to have peace there. And the United States does not want to have a hegemonic power to emerge in the region, including China. By the way, China often said that China doesn't want to be a hegemonic power in the region. United States wants to have strong security ties with allies, with friends, also in the region. Because of this commercial interests in the region, the United States wants to keep the routes, air, and other routes like ocean, sea routes to Asia open so that the commercial interests in Asia can be protected. U.S. also sees an Asian power ever since the turn of the century. U.S. sees itself as an Asian Pacific power, and therefore, and for a long time, especially after World War II, see itself as a key to the regional stability, and also see itself as a balancer of this region as for the balance of power. So that's the overall ideas that U.S. had about Asia, its objectives. U.S. objectives toward China. Currently, I think the United States wants China to have more democracy, to have rule of law, and have to protect or to respect human rights. And of course, the United States wants to keep China as a responsible power and in regional and world order. So that's U.S. objectives. And I should add here about U.S. interests in China that has been for a long time business commercial. There's a strong commercial interests and business interests in China. Actually, this can be dated long time ago, ever since 1820s. I'm teaching a U.S.-China relation course at OSU. We begin with a relationship, dating back around 1820, because when the first group of merchants arrived in China from the United States, they wanted to have a commercial relationship with China. They wanted to do business with China, and it continue to be so today. Business interests and commercial interests are very strong for this country. China is rising. That's a given. We all know that. We heard a lot about that. China is rising. So let's just go through the few things about this rising China. China is now having the fastest growing economy for quite a long time, at least the last 15 years. And in this year, China has become the fourth largest economy in the world after US, Japan, and Germany. The economy, the size of the economy is about $1.5 trillion. And China has the largest foreign exchange reserves in the world, surpassing Japan. Remember, Japan used to have the largest foreign exchange reserves, but China now has the largest one. And in this year, it has reached $819 billion. Yes?
Do you count Taiwan and Hong Kong
As part of it?
as part of the world?
No. I don't think they have the same book, because Hong Kong has separate accounting, independent from China. So, and of course, at the individual levels, if you look at the per capita income, China's per capita income now is about $1,000 per person. But if you look at China back in the late 70s, at a time when Mao died, the per capita income was only $250. So it's a huge change during this last almost 30 years. And China, during this last quarter of a century, was able to get some 230 million people out of poverty, which is a good thing for a country to move forward. But given all these good indicators, a fast-growing economy, but China is still ranked as the 50th in terms of its attractiveness as a place for doing business. Because what? Because China has a lot of corruption, because of bureaucratic red tapes, among other things. So, but China is improving itself pretty rapidly. Last year, I think China ranked 56, but this year, in 2006, it's 50th ranked in the world.
Can I get a question about the 230 million people with poverty?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any sense of what fraction of those have actually migrated from the country to the coast? I've heard 200 million numbers.
Well, that's...
What fraction of those who come out of poverty and middle class were able to stay in the inland regions?
That's a very good question. I think 200. You said 200 million people as migrant labor.
I've heard that factoid. Yes, I don't know if it's true.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty large number. I think probably 100 million is pretty commonly quoted to say there's 100 million migrant labor.
Migrated to the coastal
Right,
states.
right, yeah. So I think it's a case-by-case situation. A lot of people stayed or continue to live in a very poor condition. But if you look at women, younger women, they probably work for a while and save enough money, then return to their hometown, try to get married, set up their new businesses. So it's a different situation. Some families stayed. Some young men worked in the coastal cities and then returned to their hometown.
So what I take from what you're saying is that the prosperity on the coast is through one mechanism or another slowly spreading to inland as well.
Yes, definitely. I think also the government is doing that as a national policy, is to push inland.
Yeah.
They have to deal with that issue.
Relocation.
Right. Good. U.S. put investment into the rise of China. That's my next subject. U.S. invested quite a bit in China the first 10 years when after China opened its door to the outside world. United States actually invested about $2.4 billion in China. But China didn't really have a large amount of foreign investment until after 1992. So this is not a small amount. U.S. was number 2 during the first 10 years, and number 1 was Hong Kong and Macau. And then by 2005, United States has dropped to number 5 after Hong Kong, Virgin Islands, Japan, South Korea. So, and in that year alone, it's $3.06 billion invested in China. Yes.
Your numbers inflation adjusted, are these in current dollars?
In current dollars. Yes, in current dollars. So that's investment. U.S. invested in China's rise. Also, U.S. ever since 1985 and the Reagan administration began to transfer high technology to China. That's since 1984. And also, U.S. made possible for China to export to this country. And in 1994, the U.S. Congress decided to delink human rights issue and a trade issue for China, so made easier for China to export into this country. Of course, by 2001, China was granted this permanent MFN status. So I'm sure you all know, whenever you go to a shopping area, you can see just plenty of Chinese products, things made in China. So China has become a factory for the world, and the United States has become a very important market for this consumer goods coming into this country, which have helped China's rise, improved living standards back there. And of course, the United States, ever since early 80s, allowed many, many Chinese students come here to study, especially doing scientific studies. So that has been a huge help for China and its development. Now you can see a lot Chinese educated scientists either returning to China to teach there, or they stay here, but then they go back to help China, to establish exchange programs, to work with scientists, or, among other things. So it is a very important part of U.S. investment, actually, for China's rise. You may, we'll deal with this. And then this U.S.-China interdependency issue I'd like to touch upon. In 1973, 1 year after Nixon visited China, I have the trade figure for you here. In that year, U.S. exported some $689 million of goods to China. I think a lot has to do with food, things like that at the time. And U.S. only imported $64 million from China. But see what happened after 30 years. U.S. only exported $208.4 billion worth of goods to China, and U.S. imported some $163 billion of goods from China. And China's total trade with the world was about $851 billion. So if you look at, for those who are good at the figures, so it's close to what, it's not 1/4 yet, but it's a pretty huge amount of goods coming into this country, of course, because this U.S. is an open market for China.
You're also, the other takeaway from this slide is that you mentioned before that China's overall economy is about $1.5 trillion. Mm-hmm. So China, about 60% of China's economy is based on foreign trade.
Yes.
By contrast, in the U.S., it's more like about 10% of our economy.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Yes.
Very trade dependent.
Yes, it's a trade-driven economy, for sure. That's a very good point you add here. Yes. So this is a good chart to look at. China has become, in 2004, the second largest single country that U.S. import from, and China has surpassed Japan. Japan used to be one of the largest country in the 80s and the 90s, but now China has become such an important factor in the trade relationship. China and the U.S., of course, not only doing trade business together, but there are other cooperations, education, research. Recently, I think those are high-profile things I'm listing here. NASA and China just announced that they're going to do research together. And of course, those Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, they have a lot of connections with China. There's just endless kind of cooperations, people-to-people connections between the two countries. So by the 90s, mid-90s, China began to rise, and China began to show some force, especially when it comes to Taiwan issue. Remember, in 1997, China did some military exercises across the street, Taiwan Strait, tried to intimidate the Taiwan voters because at the time, President Li Denghui who was competing for the election, talked about Taiwan to become an independent country. So China showed force. So responding to this situation, two schools of thoughts emerged in the United States to deal with China's behavior and China's situation. Now we have this contentment versus engagement debate around that time. The first group of people, represented by some journalists, took pretty strong approach or argument. They began to say China is a military threat to the United States. Look what China is doing across Taiwan Strait. They're using their force. They're restless. They're trying to get over what they had in the past. That was the humiliation from Western powers, and they're trying to settle the scores with the history, and they're trying to replace the United States as a dominant Asian power in the region. And of course, this is all driven by nationalism. So you hear this strong argument from certain people. And then we have different views emerged from that debate. That's the engagement argument, and it was especially proposed or argued by Robert Ross. He, I believe, is first-rate scholar and very good at what he does and analyzing China and U.S.-China relations. And he made a very different argument. He said, China is not a threat to the United States. China is merely a conservative power. It is not restless power. If you look at Germany, if you look at Japan, Germany around the turn of the century and Japan around 20s and 30s was restless. It's developing, it was expanding, it tries to go out to conquer the world, build military might to compete with other powers. And he said, China is not such a power. It's not restless. But he recognized the fact that China is a wild card because there are things China was not happy at the time, especially with regard to Taiwan. And therefore, China could do some damage to the instability of the region. So therefore, he said, let's engage China. Let's get China to be more responsible, engage them, and try to reduce tension in the region. So that's good for the peace of the region, too. So that's the engagement argument made by Robert Ross at the time. And it was very, I think, well-received argument by the academic world. Maybe other people disagree with that, but let me just say that. So ever since that time, this argument, especially since the late 1990s, there has been this argument and getting louder and louder saying that China is a threat to the United States, to the world, because, first of all, China is taking our jobs away. For example, in Corvallis, we have HP. HP used to have factories there to produce inkjet. And now the factory moved to China. Then HP has to lay off people. So it's very, close to home. People say, yes, China is a threat because they're taking our job away. Our people in Corvallis are losing jobs to people in China. So there's, it's getting louder and louder. China is a threat. It's an economic threat to us. And then, of course, China is consuming more oil because China is developing so fast. So China is rival for energy consumption in the world and jacking up the price of oil. That's another criticism of China. And of course, China has been steadily increasing its military budgets, and people began to say China is a military threat to not only the United States but the world. So, is that true? Is China an economic threat to the job market, or energy consumption and a military threat to the world? Anybody has any? Yes?
Militarily, I think I'm on the engagement side. That most of China's saber rattling is out of concern that Taiwan will become formally independent. China sees it as a renegade province. They believe if they wait long enough, it will come back, and they're not happy about this. I don't see a lot of evidence for material Chinese military aggression. Regarding the economy, when you're number one and number two is growing faster than you are, you always feel threat. The question is China playing by rules that are materially different from is there ever a level playing field? And China agreed to a lot of changes in its behavior to join the WTO. I certainly believe that in the past, China subsidized exporting industries, and China still does a terrible job in policing against piracy and other intellectual property issues. But I would consider most of the rivalry an inevitable result of capitalism, and its misbehavior actually much reduced from what it was, say, 10 years ago.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Yes. What do you think about the increasing kind of engagement of China with Japan, including over resource matters, and how China's military is in effect trying to its naval power, to have more of influence in the region, especially to counteract one of the earlier things that you had said about the U.S. considering that the Pacific is their kind of turf. I wonder if you see any potential for engagement with that.
Between Japan and China?
Yes.
Okay. Let's hold that question later, to do it later. Yes?
The most important economic competitor to the United States is, in fact, the European Union. You never see anything on this article we put it all down. You never see anything hardly ever about trade disputes between the U.S. and the European Union. And the reason is people in Europe are majority white, and therefore the threat point is never going to be as high as towards Japan, China, or any country in the global south.
Okay, so actually you're making a counter argument that China actually is not an economic threat to the...
No, I'm not saying it isn't. I think the most important,
Why?
biggest, most powerful potential is the European Union. So why is all the concern about China and not
Okay.
EU, right? So,
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
how do you weigh this kind of thing?
Okay.
On the time scale you're talking about, 20 years to 50 years, who knows? I think the big problem is going to be world energy resources. And this stuff the United States can handle.
The energy. Okay. Okay, let's hold those thoughts and as we push on to the next subject. So there's the argument about, there's just so loud about China as a threat. So let me bring in Robert Ross again. He wrote the article in 1997, and this one is 2005. He wrote another article called Assessing China's Threat. And I actually strongly urge you to read this article. There's many points he made, but I think here, let me just emphasize a few. He basically recognized China is rising, but he said this rise of China's economic influence is not a threat to U.S. strategic interests in East Asia. And he further recognized that China has actually, in fact, replaced U.S. in the region as the most important market for all East Asian countries, including Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, because China now is the most important market for them, and also those countries invest more in China. So that's the fact. He recognized that. But those countries recognized that they can not trust China. They do business with China for necessity. China is there, China is growing, and it's important to do business, have economic ties with China. But they don't trust China as a neighbor. So what happened is another thing taking place in the region is there's close ties between those countries, but then there is a military realignment, meaning that those East Asian countries, or many countries, Southeast Asian countries, they began to have closer ties with the United States because they want to have this safer relationship with China. So economically, there's a regional integration with China, but militarily, there's a realignment, meaning that people try to get stronger ties militarily with the United States. And for Ross, this is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. He said a divided Asia actually is good for United States, because the United States now can have more assertive role or active role to work militarily with those East Asian countries. Am I clear on this parallel things going on in Asia? Okay. And also he said China is not building this so-called blue water naval capability. And in the last 4 or 5 years, the Chinese leadership actually has resisted the push from certain segment of the society and the military to build a blue water naval capacity. Once you have that, then certainly China is trying to assert itself as a naval power and a military power in the region. Yes?
And for this, I have a question though. For Japan and Taiwan, I think I understand why they close their military kind of ties with the U.S. But for South Korea, there's a clear threat from North Korea. Mm-hmm. And for Singapore, I just didn't see any big threat from China. It's far away. Mm-hmm. And also, Singapore has a lot of problems with its own neighbors. Mm-hmm. So I don't know about South Korea and Singapore in this case. About military.
You don't think that they...
the reason is China.
You mean, then what's the reason? Oh, you mean because there's a North Korea, that's why South Korea wants to have closer ties?
South Korea is probably bigger than, a lot bigger than China.
And bear in mind, U.S. troops have been South Korea for 50 years. So, this closeness is not new.
Yes, but then there's always this anti-U.S. military sentiment, strong anti-sentiment in South Korea. You know that.
I think that is a safety valve for domestic consumption. Let the kids protest, but don't ever let the U.S. troops actually leave.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you mean by North Korea is bigger than?
It's more direct, I would say, especially if you can enforce it.
You mean North Korea is more direct threat to South Korea? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying basically my point right here is China. The rise in China is not a reason that's why South Korea and Singapore strengthen their military relationship.
Okay. So there are other reasons.
Right.
Okay. Let's hold that thought, and then we'll move on. Okay. Well, this is the Ross argument. It's not my argument, by the way. Right. I'm just presenting his argument. Okay. Colin Powell also recently, when he last year he spoke with a group of business people in Bangkok. He basically talked about China's military and China's military threat. And he basically said there's no threat from China militarily because the threat, once you have a threat, you have to have action, intention, and he doesn't think China has the execution plan and also the intention, and he doesn't think China has that intention to pose any threat to the U.S. Instead, China wants to have peaceful relationship with the United States and its neighbors. So that's Colin Powell's argument. And very recently in May, Fallon, this U.S. commander of Asian Pacific forces, actually observed Chinese military excesses. And then he was there for 7 days and observed them, and he said, wow, they got modernized their military. Their soldiers are jumping and using the equipment. He said, wow, this is a Chinese military. They got to improve, and they got to modernize. But my students tend to be more cynical. They said, well, maybe Fallon just trying to lay out a new job for him after he retires. You know, he can get a military contract job so he can sell more military equipment to China. So that's...
First, do you know whether he was authorized to make the statement or not?
Yes, it's in the news. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So do you, I mean, he wasn't fired afterwards, so I have to assume...
No, he was
not. So I have to assume that depending on you knew about it beforehand or accepted it afterwards. Mm-hmm. Can you speculate? I mean, it's just, since if there ever was a war, this would be the guy fighting China. Generally, you don't want your adversary to have any more advantages than necessary. Mm-hmm. So this I find very paradoxical. Can you make some argument for why it would be rational for him to make this case?
Well, I guess...
or more accurately, why the implication is part of the U.S. official defense policy.
Well, I don't think it's a defense policy yet. It's probably basically is he observed it and basically said, you know, they're just not good enough. They should improve. This is not so much of a...
Well, but I mean, if he was just speaking for himself as a colonel, a colonel without considering policy implications might very well say that. You know, my guys are a lot better than your guys need to get better, and I understand that. But this is a 4-star admiral, very senior, and as I said, he presumably either cleared this in advance or at least the Pentagon has not contradicted it afterwards. So I have to assume this is at least tacitly a U.S. preference. And I just wondered if you could speculate about why it would be U.S. preference.
Okay, that's a very good point. Well, I think that's why we're trying to talk about this subject, is that there's always a hot air there about conflict, competition, China's a threat, but reality is very different. Let me show you. The fact is the Chinese send their high-ranking leaders to visit Pentagon regularly, and the Pentagon sends its people to China regularly. Right. And we have these port codes. U.S. has naval ships going to China to have port codes, and China sends its naval ships to here to have port codes. And we're talking about establishing military hotlines between the two countries. So there's a lot of things going on, but then we also had these top people talking about the threats. China has too much military budget. We should contain China. So there's things parallel going on there. So I think...
So are you arguing that his taking this position was much like Colin Powell's speech, which you showed a moment ago? And just to put this in context, the Pentagon issues a periodic report on China, which was pretty bellicose. I mean, it was certainly read as China is a threat. And I read Colin Powell's speech as an attempt to try to backpedal.
Right.
Are you suggesting this is backpedaling also?
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to tell you something is that somebody who knows about business at least made some statement. Okay. Let's just Yeah, he knows his business because he was there. He observed situation. Yeah, right. He was not giving a hot air kind of statement like, China is going to be threat. No, he's
definitely a well-considered statement.
Yes, yes.
I think if you look at the full report on this, his rationale was that a modernized PLA would, in fact, come to share the same culture and values as the U.S. And
so
that would make conflict less likely.
So it's sort of a military version of the engagement argument.
More general sense, that's right.
Okay.
The other point is, I think, to assume that there is any kind of common foreign policy with regard to China between the Defense Department and the rest of the U.S. government, or even within the Defense Department, is probably not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, they don't coordinate very closely. I certainly know that.
Good. Thank you. Let me move on. So let's define China as a power, because we talked so much about China's threat. China, of course, is a nuclear power, and ever since 1964, China has been a modest nuclear power. If you look at operational warheads in the world, and this is a 2006 figure, Russia and U.S. certainly has more than enough to destroy our world several times, right? And China had 402. France has 348, and Britain has, yeah. But anyway, it is a modest nuclear power. But I don't think people ever thought about China is going to be irresponsible throw nuclear weapon at any country. We haven't talked about that ever since '64. A lot of people say Mao was crazy, but no one accused Mao was ready to, threaten the world with nuclear weapons. But China is a modest power. And let's look at China's military budget. U.S. has this side, Russia second, and China third. And China probably, the new budget figure for this year, China's probably increasing 14%. It's a military budget. And this is China, the yellow one, versus U.S. and the world. So basically, it's the Russia, China, Japan, those advanced countries, industrialized countries, and China and Russia has more military budgets, but it's far less than the United States. So let's look at this. Pentagon overestimates China's military. So this is a reality, probably, but then they always like to make China so huge, so big. But China is a threat to the Taiwan Straits because China puts a lot of its troops around the Taiwan Strait area. So then you know the intention. That's the area most concerns China, and also China has no problem to threaten the Taiwanese and, if needed, to take some action. I hope it never happens, but this is the figure. If you look at the Taiwan Strait, China certainly put a lot there, basically try to deter Taiwan in the region. So China and the U.S., we talked about this goodwill visits. This is the picture in 2002. The U.S. ship visited Qingdao. You all heard about Qingdao. It's the headquarters for China's Eastern Fleet. Beautiful city. I was just there. You all know about Qingdao beer, right? That's the place they produce Qingdao beer, and also it's the headquarters for the Eastern Fleet. So the U.S. tend to go there. This is 2002, and this is 2005. So there's a lot of things going on. People do not hear that much, but they're doing things together. China's still a poor country. With all this talk about China as a threat, let's come back to the reality. China's still a poor country, a developing country, and is confronted with many, many challenges that will take time and money to do so. Environmental problems cost a lot of money. Billions of dollars going into to take care of the environment in China. Social unrest in certain regions because peasants in China still do not have the guarantee of land ownership, so the government can take away as it wishes. They want to build roads, build factories. Still it is not guaranteed. You have this social unrest at different places. Separatist movement in northwestern China, especially this Xinjiang Uyghur Turkic-speaking region. That's a headache for the government. Corruption of the officials who, you all heard about that, corruption of CCP officials. And then, of course, this increased disparity between the rural poor and the city wealthy people. And then you have this, of course, this underlying conflict, tension built there in the society. So it's a country confronts a lot of problems that cannot be ignored. I think before or during the visit of a recent visit by Hu Jintao, I think New York Times actually published an article quoting the private talks between Hu Jintao and Bush last year. And Hu Jintao basically told Bush, he said, why do you have to worry about China? I have so many problems. I have environmental problems. I have social unrest. I have, what else? The disparity between the rich and the poor. I have so many problems in my hand. Why do you have to worry about me? Worry about China. So I think he probably pretty serious when he said that. But what I'm trying to convey to you that China is rising, is growing, but China is still a poor country. Just think about it. Per capita income is only $1,000, and it takes a long time for China to rise. Overall, has $5,000 per capita income. So with all that, I want to ask you to think about, is China belligerent power, as some asserted, or conservative power, a status quo power, a regional power, a world power? My answer to this is China, the rising China, actually is not a threat to the U.S., to the U.S. fundamental interests in Asia, not in the near future, probably even 10 years or down the road, because China doesn't have the intention to threat U.S. or U.S. Also, China doesn't have the capability to do so. That's all my 50 minutes, I guess. Thank you very much. If you have questions, let's move on. Yes?
Well, some of your focus, some of your focus was on military threats. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, of course, the trade deficit causes especially demographic conflicts and economic threats. But I want to talk about one sort of an economic threat that's not talked about very much. As you mentioned, China has the largest foreign exchange reserves in the world, and a very substantial fraction of them are invested in dollar-denominated assets. That is the main reason why U.S. interest rates are so low. There's enormous Chinese investment in U.S. treasuries. If there was ever a foreign policy crisis, do you believe that the Chinese central bank, acting as an agent of the government, would flex its muscle, for instance, dumping dollars in order to try to exercise some leverage on U.S. foreign policy?
Why do they do that?
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
why do they dump dollars to?
Oh, what does that mean? Okay. Well, for example,
anybody has any other? He raised a good question. Anybody has?
It would hurt the U.S. economy, but
so
if they dump dollars, it's going to do harm the U.S. economy.
Specifically, let's say, I don't know, you said they have $800 billion in foreign exchange reserves. I'll bet you $200 or $300 billion of those is U.S. treasuries. If they suddenly sold $50 billion of those, for example, that would flood the market with treasuries, that would depreciate the dollar, and as you said, would harm the economy by greatly increasing U.S. inflation.
Okay.
And so my question is, do you think that's a plausible? They would not do it just out of clear blue. They would do it or threaten to do it to try to exercise some leverage over us, for example, in Taiwan's Great Sprightly crisis.
Okay.
Do you find that a plausible scenario?
Well, it's only when things really go bad. I don't think we talked a lot about U.S., what U.S. wants in Asia and China, but we haven't really talked much about China wants. Right. China wants a stable. China wants this market, right? To have goods coming into this market. They can sell. They can keep people working. Why do they want to destroy this economy?
No, I agree with you. Clearly, anything, if you cause a recession in the U.S., you would therefore increase U.S. demand for China. Right. I understand that. The question is, of course, as in any public policy issue, the hard questions are always, which do I want more? Mm-hmm. Am I, China, willing to accept that as the cost of, for example, keeping Taiwan from becoming independent? Or keeping the U.S. from militarily intervening in a threat to Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So what this really boils down to is which does China want more? And if you have any insights about that.
Well, I think China basically wants status quo. It wants to buy time to build its country. The Olympic is coming up. I know a lot of group of students are going from this university going there. Olympic is coming up. China is trying to build up the country, trying to get things done. I was in Qingdao. I was told that's the place they're going to have the sailboat race. So they're building those decks for sailboat lanes or things like that. People are busy with their lives. The coming up Olympic, and I think when I went to China this time, I get a sense this is not restless country. This is a country that people are getting more realistic about life. Young people are more worried about getting a job, getting a good university, getting a job, getting a car, getting married, and buy a condo. They were more worried about that. They're not going out to protest, looking for trouble. And I don't think China is trying to do something to get influence or getting a fight with somebody. It's not the situation. So I don't think a sane person would do a lot of things that we might think they're going to dump the dollars, or why do they do that? They have to have reasons to do that. Yes?
I think that we oftentimes believe that everybody ultimately comes to thinking like we think. And so, when we're applying the logic of this gentleman, I see our own country using the logic first, and then everybody else saying, oh, that's the way we ought to behave, maybe. Or we think that they're going to act the way that we think. And I think that we need to offer all other countries a little more slack in terms of we're centuries invested in capitalism. And I think it's going to be kind of a new experience for a lot of the third world. It may take them a few generations to really figure it out.
Yes, any other? Yes.
How many people are in China?
No, it's a 64.5 million members. Yeah. I think they still, it's interesting when you go there. Seems you do not see much a party, but then, for example, when we were there, we were trying to meet certain people, and then we were told, oh, he's having a meeting with all the important party members this afternoon, so he cannot meet you. And I have friends going to Central Party School to have 3 months of training. The party is still trying to get party members toe the line to be, there is a policies, you should support it. But also, I think they are trying to find solutions to many problems. They go to those meetings and try to talk about problems, how to deal with it. I think that's a pretty realistic situation. Yes, back there.
During Hu Jintao's recent visit to the United States, he was not given a state dinner. And then there was this episode where the name of the country was announced as the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. How was that received by the elites in China, and was it played up in the press?
Well, I think I talked to people, and people saw that as disrespectful toward China, and especially so it's intentional. And I said, oh, well, that's a Bush administration. They didn't. And then it's probably just a mistake, but a lot of people take it as, intentionally try to embarrass China. There is kind of that underlying feeling in China. There's a lot of things they did intentionally. For example, there's this woman, the Falun Gong woman, made a statement, and then a lot of people saw that's intentional, led her to be doing that. And I said, why? Because in China, basically, you cannot get a private citizen so close to a presidential visit. In this country, it's different. She was able to do it. So it's difficult to say that, no, she was not set up to do that. But then people say, she spoke for so long. How come no one just grab her and, right away and take her away? So, there's the strong suspicion there that there's, some people care, some people don't care. But then once you talk about those things, people do have this suspicion, basically. Try to embarrass China. Any other questions? Yes.
It's important to distinguish between the Communist Party members and the rest of the people in China. You can see that the Communist Party members, their best interest is remaining the dominant people. And the United States is an ally in doing this to create some prosperity for the other people. And so that's the reason why it would not be a threat. Because the United States and the party are allies, not necessarily China overall.
But it's interesting if you look at a lot of people who are in position at universities, at a lot of places, they're party members. And you won't tell the difference. I mean, you can just say, oh, those are the hard-working, good Chinese. They just like us. But then they're party members. And I think I met a lot of wonderful human beings in China. They're party members. If they come to the United States, probably they'll make to the executive because they're just capable, hardworking people. And they can make it at any society. That's what I think. Any other? Yes?
You have one slide there from Mr. Ross who was saying that he didn't think the Chinese were developing the blue water Navy capability. I've heard the opposite in other forums, and I wonder if there's any data that's available, reliable data as to how much they are spending
on Navy? Oh, then you have to talk to some specialists. They can have certain data. Because people really study about China's military stuff. People write about it. Maybe you can email Ross. Maybe he knows. He knows. I don't have answer to it.
The second-hand estimates I've seen suggest that China under-reports its total military spending by a factor of about 4. Can't speak for the Navy specifically. Now, that's not my number. I'm just repeating what's ever in the press.
Okay. Any other questions from students who are going to China? Yes.
I probably want to add something here. This is just my personal opinion. I myself have very strong doubts about the rise of China. I don't think, from my personal view, I don't think that's the case. Really.
You don't think China is rising?
Yes, I really fundamentally, have doubts about this, about this claim, maybe in the U.S. And I talk. I have been in this university faculty for 6 years. I talked to so many Americans there and my students. I've always said, no, that's really not the case. Because I'm the person who is from the very humble, humble background. I know very well, the lower class, the lower groups of, the Chinese people, how they suffer, every day. The income, the annual income. I know that very well. So I think most of Americans, or Westerners, when they go to China, they normally only go to like Beijing, Shanghai, those big cities. But if you go to like the interior province, then you will get a complete different picture. So I really have thoughts about this claim made in the West about the rise of China.
Well, I guess I probably disagree. China is rising, that's for sure. But then whether or not China's a threat, that's a very entirely different question. It's rising, relatively speaking, from the past. I mean, if you look at the time when China only had $250 per capital income, now it's 1,000 plus. It's a big change. And when China had only very small $250 billion national GDP, but now it's a 1.5 trillion, and it's the fourth largest economy in the world. That's a big change, I think. That's a big change. Number 4, it's not too shabby. It's not too shabby. Of course, it's if you compare with U.S., which is about 10 trillion, 12 trillion, and Japan is 4 or 5 trillion. China's 1.5 trillion. That's a long way to go, but it's not shabby. I mean, if you compare with the past, that's the only thing I'm trying to say. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, but can't you, just like in this country, when we have people telling us how great our economy is, but people say, yeah, well, the numbers sound good, but if you speak to individuals about certain things, and I've spent time in the Chinese countryside in various places, and I mean, it's going to impress you as well, where the people who live in the countryside, they no longer have access, to even ninth-grade education or healthcare. That was a part of the socialist umbrella in the 1970s and 80s. So how is that? I think this is, as far as stability goes, this is one of the Chinese Communist Party's biggest worries, and they seem to be propping all this up with, occasionally making people feel very nationalistic about China and China rising. But the fact is, in many areas, the stability infrastructure is falling apart and it's not being built there. I mean, it's like when farmers see golf courses being built on land that they were farming.
Then the land be taken away.
It's kind of hard for them to believe that China is rising. So I do think that he makes a pretty good point about exactly what those numbers mean, per capita numbers and things like that, especially when we're talking about such a massive population, who is benefiting from it. So I do think that it's really a pretty sticky and complicated question.
Whether or not China is rising.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to add something to basically, I think China is such a big country, and with diversity, ethnic groups in different regions. I would say it's extremely difficult to grasp a real picture of China. If you go to China, say just go to Beijing, Shanghai, say, wow, China is like New York, like Los Angeles. But then if you go to Wuhan, central China, you will say, wow, China is like Thailand. But then if you go to say 100 miles away from Wuhan, like my hometown, you will say, well, this is Africa. So, I have just finished a 6-month field research in China, in central China, province of Wuhan. The average income, for Wuhan, for the citizen is less than 1,000 Chinese yuan. So basically, it's only $100. So what are you talking about, like the rise of China? And one of my sisters, she got that so-called good job, like 500 Chinese yuan. It's like $60 every month. And she thinks that's a great job. And then just think about this, the average Chinese, and also in my hometown, like the female, the kids, they even cannot finish, the primary school. They only get a 3-year school education for female, for girls. For kids, probably like for 5 years or at most like 7 years. That's, if you look at this, then you will see what the real China is. So I would urge you guys, if you go to China, you have to go visit the villages, the rural area. Then that's the real China.
Well, that's you added a very good point to here. This, I don't think I'm trying to say here that China is a superpower or power, but China certainly has changed in the last quarter of a century. The change has been profound. I think, let's be fair, China is changing in a profound way in many areas, but. As I said, also, the Chinese government is confronting enormous problem to deal with. We talked about this $800-some billion foreign exchange reserves. People in China, especially some older party members who are retired, are demanding government to use that money to solve social problems. So I don't think they have the free hand to dump it into the market, so to crush the United States. They have handful to deal with all the social problems and to deal with environment, deal with rural society, this, whole range of a problem. So I think, in a way, they're dealing with it now because I think the new policy is they're trying to exempt rural taxation from peasants for a period of time. And also for the next 2 years, the government is going to probably give free education to rural kids for 2 years, which is too short. I think they should give 10 years free education to rural kids in China. As I said, I'm not a China apologist. I'm just trying to be fair, to present a different perspective here. But I do believe China as a country has changed profoundly from different perspectives. Economy, people's overall living standard has changed one way or another. Okay.
We have to end it on that. We thank you very much for leading the discussion today.
Thank you. Thank you.